Let's take some questions from the audience. Who's got gentleman here?
What do you think that the average person can do to push against the narrative of madness?
Jay.
I think, first of all, in your personal life, be kind to those who were on the other side. Because there was a majority on the other side here, and we need them on our side in order to get the reforms. So what that means is, and I've been trying to live this in my life, to be forgiving. There's just no other way. There's too many of them, and they're too dear to us. Even if they did really, really mean, cruel things, you have to somehow find it in your heart to be forgiving. I think that's the first and most important thing we can do. We are going to win a majority because we were right. There's been too much damage done, too much harm done to all of us, including to the people on the other side. And so we need to help them. And that starts by forgiving them.
John.
Jay, a lot of the public policy was actually developed on the fly here in Australia and inflicted on the rest of the world. And it was developed on the fly when politicians, with their media briefing team, walked into a press conference and made announcements on decisions that literally they'd just come up with as they were dealing with the 24/7 media cycle. The old authoritarianism involved state-run media. Do we now live in a polity that involves a media-run state?
I think it's funny because when I talk to journalists, honest journalists, they blame other journalists. Rowan, you blame other journalists, don't you? There are honest politicians, and when I talk to Ron DeSantis, when I talk to honest politicians, they blame other politicians. I blame the scientists. I blame us. We foisted this illusion that the lockdowns were the only way. And then when you say I'm the science, when I'm the only, I know science itself, I'm science itself, politicians are helpless. They don't, most of them, unless they have a capacity, they can't push back. And journalists, there aren't that many Rowan Deans out there, unfortunately. It's just a very difficult thing to ask those kinds of questions. It's much easier. You don't want to lose the sources you have on the inside. You don't want to criticize them. It's just much more difficult. I think journalists should have asked questions, but really, they went to the scientists, the top scientists, the top scientist bureaucrats, Tony Fauci. He told them that everything else other than him was the science. And then what do? It's we scientists with these concentrated power that fooled the people of the world. I wrote an article with the title "How Fauci Fooled America," but he didn't just fool America, did he?
No, absolutely. And you're right. In Victoria, there was only one journalist, well, there were a couple, but basically Peter Credlin was the journalist who held Dan Andrews to account over aspects of COVID, but suffered the punishment accordingly. If the moment you question anything, that was it, you're a granny killer, away you go, you shouldn't be on air, etc. Next question, thanks.
Hi, I'm an internationally trained medical doctor, and I do agree with a lot of the criticism levelled to my peers, many of who've been spineless and who failed with the understanding of medical consent. But my question actually relates to that and also what Professor Benson said with regard to an enshrinement of a codification, a Bill of Rights or a charter of some sort. If you look at Canada, where physicians have spoken out, such as Professor Roger Hodgkinson, people like Justin Trudeau, whom I do not hold in high regard at all, absolutely crushed any dissenting voice from some of the top medical doctors. Now, do you therefore feel that having something that's enshrined in law would actually make as much of a difference as you've intimated?
Professor.
Well, you asked a great question. I sort of touched on it earlier by saying there's a difference between documents and culture. So one would hope that the process of forming such a statement would have its own cultural effect. So I think, yes, you should have it. By the way, with respect to Justin Trudeau, the old adage is that the apple doesn't fall very far from the tree. I met his father, spent an evening with Pierre Trudeau.
Oh, Castro.
In this case, the tree was on a cliff.
The apple question over here, thanks, on our left.
Thanks. Actually, can I say first of all how exhilarating it is to be here? I think we've been waiting for such a long time. So I'm an engineer, systems engineer, and in a major systems society in Australia, and Andrew and me sort of been doing COVID operations, trying to get a systemic approach into what's going on. And we use stories, right, to explain this, and there have been so many from the past, but two that stand out, when the WHO first came into being, Borneo, the malaria plague, they came in, a part-focused DDT, killed the mosquitoes, and then caused other problems, unintended consequences. The great leap forward in China, when, again, part-focused stuff. You focus on a part, not the interactions, and things go wrong, unintended consequences. And I think you all touched on this. I'm just wondering, in terms of one of the things that comes out in this regard, and in engineering too, is there's a governance function. You don't make a change to a part without looking and understanding the implication on the whole. Is there a need to change government in that sense? And I think you touched on this, but where is the governance that is systemic? So we bring in representation from across industry, academia, and capabilities that provides for a holistic picture to when critical decisions have to be made. And how do we change our governance frameworks to make that happen?
Gigi, one for you, I think.
Yeah, look, this is a great question, and it's exactly that sort of thing that keeps me up. I mean, that's what we need. We need more diverse perspectives and representation. Of course, I like to think that economics is the discipline that is trained to look at the whole, right? I mean, my father was an engineer, my mother was a psychologist. And economics is kind of right there in the nexus of those two. But even in economics, we had catastrophic failure within the profession to actually call this out. So, we may be told when we're in school this is what we're supposed to do, but we sort of get seduced by the career incentives and whatever else once we become practicing. And so I think that the key is to get people who truly represent the interests of different swaths of society. And of course, the phenomenon of the career politicians, which is what you referred to earlier, Iain, is a big part of the problem here, because of course back in the day, politicians were people who actually had real jobs for a long time and then entered politics. So they truly represented some swath of the population, bricklayers or lawyers or, teachers or whoever it was. And so they were able to barrack for what was in the interest of that group, right, and who had those perspectives. And so it really is the preservation and the voicing of the different perspectives that exist in the population as a whole, representative, that you want to have somehow coming forward in the allocation decision. And that's why the citizen jury thing for us makes sense. We have another proposal, which is just about to go on the Brownstein Institute site, and Jeffrey Tucker, who's the founder, was resisting this a bit because it's kind of anti-libertarian, but the idea is, and we tend to want to preserve individual freedom, but the idea is that there would be a community service program introduced whereby each person on reaching the age of 20 would do some media training, some sort of training in how to create truth, basically. Because right now
they shouldn't do media training then. Last thing they should do.
But exactly. But this is why I use the word, right? Because truth is what we've been told, we've been hearing through the airwaves, but it's not really, right? And there's different truths from different perspectives. So the idea that you have everyone in the society trained in the tools of media combat, basically, and then able to sift through and give a judgment on whether something's quality or not, or produce their own stories on something. It's kind of like community service, just like cleaning up the parks. Yes, let me give you a service, which is to use my perspective to inform you a little bit, just a little bit, right? And everybody has to do that.
Okay, that's good. I'm going to cut you off there because we've got a lot of people, a lot of questions. That's great. Thanks, Gigi. Next question.
Yes, well, I would claim to be a great supporter of Gigi and perhaps the second academic in the world who's taken a different stance to all my colleagues at NSW and elsewhere. But from our vantage on the waterfront, we could see the totalitarian nature of the attack. Police would be stationed every 50 metres along walking tracks along the water, barriers erected for many kilometres. The police helicopters, the police boats were out there chasing surfers away and trying to prevent everyone getting into water. So my good thing about your speech is you referred to the defence of these guys, which is dolphins. So they were protecting the dolphins, so we should at least think about the positive side of what they were doing by spending millions denying us access to the water. So can you account for why it is that when they embark on something like this, they go to enormous detail? Everyone must be denied access to the outdoors. Everyone must be denied access to water or healthy activities. We must be punished to the maximum extent possible. Perhaps.
So your thoughts, Jay, on that, on the police overreach, I guess, authoritarians?
If you accept the premise that the virus is a beast, that it's everywhere, that it's lurking to get you, anything is possible. There's nothing left on the table. And if it's airborne Ebola that will destroy you and kill your family and kill your kids and it'll kill your grandma, mainly grandma, anything is possible. The vast overreach is justified by a scientific lie. And absent that scientific lie, that kind of overreach. Now, of course, there are many other steps that lead to that overreach. It's a gross human rights violation. Law failed. Every single profession that should have protected the people from this failed. But the start was this scientific lie that it was a beast, that it was going to kill you, it's going to kill your grandma, that it was a unique threat to you and your existence.
Jay, it'll amuse you. Sorry, Iain. It'll amuse you that health officers in Australia, one of them told us that if you could smell your neighbour's cooking, you were going to get COVID because it would travel on the thing. Another told us that there was a football match which finally went to South Australia, and the chief health officer there warned South Australians not to touch the football that had been kicked by the Victorians or the New South Welshmen or whoever it was. That was the level of intellectual, scientific rigour.
I'll tell you, Rowan, it could be worse, because you could have had Theresa Tam, Canada's health minister, who told you that, who gave sex advice about how to get COVID. Look it up. I can't say it in polite company. Or you could have had Tony Fauci as your chief health officer. Think about that for a minute.
Very quickly.
One of my students came back from West Africa where there was an Ebola outbreak where he'd been. And he was asked when he came into the airport, and this is a few years ago, just a couple years ago. He was asked, have you been in West Africa? He said, yes. Were you in an Ebola area? Yes. Do you have any symptoms? No. Fine, on you go. Seriously.
Fantastic. Next question, please.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Hassan, and I have a legal background. Thank you very much to all the presenters. It seems to me the prevailing theme of your presentations has been just the failure of consensus, especially expert consensus, trademark. And it seems to really has a lot of those religious overtones. My question is, given that there's been such a huge failure of consensus in the health domain, and as well as the economic and the legal domain, it raises the question of what other issues are we currently getting wrong that we're going to regret in the next 2.5 years? So Jay, if you could save us 2.5 more years, and the rest of the panelists as well, what is that? For example, I'll keep it very quick. You mentioned double-digit excess death this year. How much of that can we attribute to the vaccines?
I don't know the answer to that question. I honestly don't. I do think that some of it is attributable to the vaccines. Probably, like if you're thinking about what happened to young people, it's probably not COVID that's the reason. So there's really only two things. It's lockdown harms, suicides, alcoholism, and potentially vaccine effects. So I don't know of a good study that distinguishes the two, but we desperately need one.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Totally agreed.
Next question here, thanks.
Dr. Jay, could you make some observations on what you've seen in other countries? We've seen what happened in Australia. We locked down, it was all good. Then it went crazy after travellers were let in. Sweden didn't lock down, and it was probably no worse than anywhere else. And then I was watching Dr. John Campbell the other night, and he'd gone to Uganda, and they sort of say what a nothing it was over there because they had bigger problems like malaria and so on. So just some observations on that, and just in general on when we try to make sense from data from other countries to see what's happening. And when we look at US data, it just seems completely inconsistent with what's seen. UK probably has the best data. Our data from it's probably a bit below that, but not so bad. So any observations on?
So the main thing is, I think we have a control group. We can see what happened in Sweden. Sweden was. Very early in the pandemic, they didn't do focus protection. Lots of people died in Stockholm nursing homes that if only they had kept those Stockholm nursing homes free of COVID, we would have very early seen that Sweden was a success. Sweden has about the same overall excess mortality as Australia, and Australia's is increasing and Sweden's is declining through the pandemic. Yep. Florida has the same age-adjusted mortality from COVID as California, which was deeply locked down, and has lower overall excess death than California. The control groups point to lockdowns being a deep failure. And Uganda, unfortunately, actually is not a success. They closed their schools for 2 years. 4.5 million Ugandan children never came back. Generational theft from the poorest of the poor.
Oh, sure.
Yes, please.
Hi, first of all, thank you so much for your time. My question is, we now have a politicisation of the medical industry. I'm from the medical industry. We have a governing body, APRA, who has sent out emails warning all the medical industry to not talk about the vaccine. They have absolutely no one to account to. And we all know as medical professionals that there is nobody that they answer to. What is your suggestion for a governing body like that? And I'm sure this is a worldwide conscientious effort, full of bureaucrats, because I believe APRA has only one doctor on its board, being that of a psychologist. How do we deal with something like that?
In California, there's a bill pending that will make it essentially a penalty such you can lose your medical license if you post misinformation online, where misinformation is determined by Tony Fauci. That is dangerous. It's dangerous to the patients. It's dangerous to free speech. And it's most dangerous to trust between patients and doctors. Because when you go to a doctor, you want them to be thinking of you, not of public health at large. You want them to be honest with their thoughts and opinions. In the United States, I think the First Amendment can be used to fight this. I don't know what the answer is in Australia.
We don't have a First Amendment. What we do have is the fact that this threatening email was sent on the 9th of March 2021. And what it has done is completely obliterated informed consent in the medical office and introduced a politician which there is no business of that being there.
I think there's a new medical society in Australia called the AMPS. I do regret that. I think splintering of medical societies is not good. But when you have the chief medical society that has failed the doctors in Australia and have failed the patients of Australia, it's disheartening. I think you have no choice. The similar thing has happened in the U.S. as well.
I might just add that in addition to AMPS, there's also groups that have grown up in other industries where there have been institutions that have been tainted beyond repair during this period. And one of them, I don't know where John is at the moment. Is he there? Yes. One of them, maybe I'll just mention quickly, we're trying to start up here in Australia called the Australians for Science and Freedom. And the idea there is essentially an alternative to some of the other social scientific and also health organizations that have essentially just turned a blind eye to COVID, trying to have some publications, some conferences, some meeting of minds, some airing of diverse perspectives. So to the extent that those new institutions can grow legs, even in the absence of a First Amendment, we can still push back and basically show that it is possible to have a functional, organized, professional society that respects those kinds of values that we used to think were being respected by the entrenched existing institutions. And so I would encourage people to keep a lookout for the Australian Science and Freedom and also other organizations in other professions.
So is there a website yet for that?
John? No, not yet. Okay. Soon, hopefully.
Soon, okay.
There's an American version called the Academy of Science and Freedom, sponsored by Hillsdale College. So you can go look at. We actually, I think, have a website, but we just had a big conference where Scott Atlas, Martin Kulldorff, and I gave some speeches, and you can find that online.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Yes, next speech. Yeah, question.
My name is Matthew. I'm a dentist here. I'm from Northern Ireland originally. First off, I just want to say thank you so much. I'm grateful for everybody coming here tonight and just speaking. It's the first time I've heard in the last 2 years, in person, speaking any kind of sense. It's just been complete madness. I'll try to be brief. I was just curious on what your macro framework is looking like over the next 5-10 years. I can't help but feel that COVID was step one of something else that seems to be going on. It may have been a test case partially to see how populations react to these type of things. I don't want to overthink such a scenario, but I'm just very curious what your sort of macro framework is looking like going forward.
I mean, I don't know if it's a test case or not. I will say that it revealed incredible weaknesses in our social system, in the elite professions. It revealed this sort of penchant toward trickle down epidemiology. So let's take care of the top people. The lockdowns are a luxury of the laptop class, and everyone else can be damned. That is an opportunity for reform, in my view. right? Because it's not something, the next 5 years is not determined. It depends on what we as a people do in response to what has happened. If we just let it, forget about it, and it just was in the past, that it will be a test case. It will be these powers that we found that people had over us, that we never realized that people had over us, will be used over and over again, unless we push back.
I would also say just over the next few years, I am expecting quite a lot of economic stress, right? I mean, this is the beginning. We have the inflation now that constantly gets talked about on the airwaves. We've had riots, food riots, we've had just a collapse. And if you look at some of the European data, it's shocking, right? I mean, 50% of pension assets are gone, I mean, that kind of thing can't happen and have just, everybody goes about their business. Like there is serious consequence from that sort of catastrophic economic dysfunction, and labor markets still haven't come back to normal here, even in Australia. And so I am expecting there's going to be difficult times ahead as well. I mean, no matter what macro version of events you have, we have the COVID policy mistakes have wrought those consequences, right? That connection needs to be made more in the media. Like what we have now, oh yeah, it's Ukraine or something, okay, or it's climate change, or it's all those gender bendy people, or whoever it is who's doing the wrong thing. No, we made these mistakes for 2.5 years. If you ruin the economy gets ruined. All right, so we need to call that out.
Professor Benson, some thoughts there?
Yeah, briefly, there's been state capture and institutional capture. APRA was mentioned. You've got conflicts of interest a mile wide with respect to big pharma, and that needs to be outed. And all the talk about love and forgiveness up here, I agree with it, but you also need to get in people's faces. There has to be accountability. So I would start asking every single politician, every single media person you meet, every single person in government policy, where were you during the COVID madness and what did you do? Yeah. Because unless this becomes a widespread cultural conversation of encounter, yes, respectful, but it needs to be encounter, we are going to see phase 2 of this or phase 3. And I think reading the book I told you about by Klaus Schwab, it's very clearly a plan they have to use COVID and climate change to affect global governance. So I think this is a rollout.
Yes, please.
Good evening. Hi, Rowan, Jay, Gigi, and Iain. I'm the CEO of the Australian Medical Network. Diana Dragomirovich. Rowan, you can remember my last name. We started out with the COVID pandemic back in 2020, and we're one of the original groups that fought it on head-on. We've been dealing with the early stage treatments when nobody else was treating patients with COVID. We were helping doctors who were getting suspended. We were dealing with the public who were, dealing with mandates and losing their jobs. So what we witnessed over the last 2 years has been quite distressing for all of us. So thank you for all the work that you're doing, because it gave us hope here. And maybe you didn't know about our existence, so that's why I'm giving you a bit of a plug. I have 2 parts to my question. The first part is a medical one, and the second is legal. The medical one is when it comes to informed consent, when somebody goes and gets a procedure, it doesn't really sit, or it can't be really used. The problem that we found the way around it was risks and disclosure. That was, and the case law, Rogers versus Whittaker, that helped us achieve that. Now, what I wanted to know is, in the States, how have doctors been able to support patients in making these decisions, because they're very, very big decisions. The second part to this, sorry, I'm hogging it now, is on October 11 in Queensland, there's a bill that's going to be passed in Parliament that will basically control medicine in Australia. And doctors will not be able to advise their patients of harms when it comes to a procedure. Now that could be due to climate change, it could be due to terrorism, it could be due to anything. So how do we use the rule of law to get on the back foot of that? Because all your ideas are great, it's the how. It's the how are we going to do it? American doctors face the same.
thank you for your question. Thank you for your work. I mean, the American doctors have faced the same exact problem that you described. American doctors have lost their license for prescribing early treatment. American doctors have faced threats to their their practice, and most American doctors have responded by just silence. It's because they've worked their lives to care for their patients, but now if they care for the patients the way they think they ought to care for their patients, they're gonna have questions behind them. Now that's not true everywhere. I mean, Florida has been mostly free, for instance. It's really and then the U.S. is sort of split in this sort of political way. But it is a massive threat to American medicine because doctors and patients have essentially been separated from each other. Right? It's very difficult for patients to and there've been this underground network of doctors to try to get exemptions, for instance, from the vaccine or early treatment. It's been shocking to watch, especially if you have a disease where no one really knows how to treat it early days. You have some theories about like what might work. People are dying in front of you. Why not try relatively safe medicines? Like, what was wrong with that? And why not rapidly get assessments of them, large-scale randomized studies of relatively inexpensive things? I mean, just all these things were like that should have been done that weren't. The legal, that law you talked about in Queensland, the same law, the very similar ones is going to likely be passed in California. I think that law in California will get overturned on First Amendment grounds. There are already a whole bunch of doctors lined up to sue over it. I have no idea how it will go in Australia.
There's no such thing as medical ethics, because what happened is ethics fragmented. So you've had for a long time different types of ethics, and you need to look at history. Hippocrates was one of many, many schools of medicine, and one because of the ethics of the system that he propounded. And what happened was people voted with their feet to go to such a physician. Okay, that's really important to recognize. If you could go to your physician and not be killed because a relative paid the physician money to do so, think of euthanasia now, you went to that physician. I agree with Jay's hesitation here, but I would differ slightly in this respect. I think the time has come for medicine to split into a genuine medicine and leave the others to it.
Maybe we should get together and write that.
Charter, I can help with that. Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, and again, thank you for the great work you do. Excellent. Tony Nicholas, again. Sorry.
Yeah, I was at that conference. This is not my question, but I was interviewing a whole lot of doctors, and very sadly, that they weren't necessarily suspended, though a lot of them were. The majority of them, if they were over 50, they said, we're out, this doesn't work for our ethics and morality and what we're actually here to do. We're going to see a massive brain drain of the good doctors, the ones who no longer want to be silent. But the media are culpable. Let's assume, we'll be kind, as you suggest. Everyone lost their collective minds 2.5 years ago. We'll forgive them. But now we have vax mandates. People are still losing their jobs. We have excess mortality. We have thousands of vax injuries. Where are the journalists now? Where is the media? Are they still trying? What is happening?
That's on me. Next question. Great question. Tony.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, and thanks to the panel. I'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you, because what we've seen over the last 2 years has been nothing short of hysteria. But to each and every one of you, Rowan, I was on your show really early on with that letter. Jay, absolutely remarkable. Gigi and Iain, thank you so much. I think I'd like to hear a round of applause for these. Really early on in the pandemic, we ran a case, a religious case, I believe, Jay, and a really quick story. And I contacted Jay over in the USA, and we were very grateful at the fact that he put up his time free, as he said, free of charge. Now, just to give you an idea, have you ever seen those movies where that team loses, and when they get to the grand final, they win? That's the team we're on. I I just want you all to know one thing, is that during that case, the religious case actually went down in the federal court before Justice Griffiths. But the next day, Gladys Berejiklian came out and opened up all the churches and said in the next 2 weeks you can all go to your place of religion. Okay? So when you play in these rigged games, you can win. You may not get the actual victory, but it's the win that counts. And I just want you all to know is that we continue to fight, and we're going to continue to fight. I certainly know my firm's doing that all the way. We've seen some videos up there earlier on about the masks. We have had some massive victories with respect to the masks, okay? And also against APRA, okay? So, yes, certainly there was that one at Seven Hills where the 12-year-old children were all being pepper sprayed.
Sorry, Tony, I'm just going to interrupt you. Jay's got to go. So you've got a quick question?
Yeah, I certainly do. I just want to
Jay, then he's gone.
one thing, Jay, before you go. What we have seen is this switching of the burden when it comes to risks. And especially on the risks of medication. So what I mean by that is the pharmaceutical industry is now saying that it's up to you to prove something's dangerous rather than say it's safe. What is your view on that?
That's insane. I don't know what to say. I mean, I think if you take away the liability law, then pharmaceutical companies can essentially have free reign to put products on the market that have not been adequately tested. Those laws protect patients. Those laws are vital to have that patients will have confidence that the drugs that they're taking are worth taking. I think any change in those kinds of structures is going to be a disaster for patient health.
Well, I'd just like to say Tony's right. Of course, we're going to win, but Jay, he's far too modest, and the forgiveness is great. Well done, Jay. Okay, terrific. Some of us don't quite go that way, but ratings are important, so there's no way we don't forgive. Let's give him a standing ovation, because seriously, what this man has been through and what he's done is just fantastic.
Oh, you guys, please, you guys. Thank you. I'm so grateful to each and every one of you. I'm speechless, actually. I not normally am. You guys are at the center of the fight, and I can't wait to see what Australia accomplishes. And it'll be this group. It'll be people like you that'll be the nidus of a reform, an enormous reform of Australian society, of Western society, of world, the whole world, so that. What we experienced will have meaning in the form of healing of the whole world as a consequence of the pain you've suffered. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming along. And Jay, you've got to go, so let Jay speak on. Great to see you again. Thank you. Speak soon. So I'd just like to say, Jay's got to dash off, but just quickly, let's also thank the Reverend Fred Nile, who made it possible for us to all be here this evening. Fred's a great bloke. If you haven't met him, he's a really guy.